Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through time back to a boy who carried an empire on his shoulders before he could even grow a proper beard. You're standing in the marble courtyard of Edirne Palace, the spring air cool against your face. It's 1444, and the peacocks are louder than the soldiers. Somewhere beyond those carved wooden doors, a child named Mehmed is about to be crowned Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, 12 years old. Imagine being handed the keys to millions of lives before you even hit puberty. You probably wouldn't survive this, honestly. Neither would I. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ceremony begins as you move closer through the murmuring crowd. The air smells of incense and horse sweat, a strange mix that somehow defines empire. The boy sits tall on a golden throne, his face pale under the heavy turban, his eyes sharp, serious, almost too knowing dart toward the old men in the council who whisper behind beards and silken sleeves. His father, Murad II, has just abdicated, exhausted from decades of war. Some say he wanted peace. Others whisper that Mehmed begged him to retire so he could rule. Historians still argue whether Murad truly trusted his son or simply wanted to test him. You stand there, watching this boy try to look like a man. He grips the imperial seal with trembling fingers. The crowd bows, and for a moment the empire holds its breath. Outside, the call to prayer rolls through Edirne's stone alleys, the echo of history just beginning to hum. At first, you can almost believe it'll go well. Mehmed talks like he's read every scroll in the palace library, because he practically has. He speaks Arabic, Persian, Greek, even a little Latin. He quotes Alexander the Great like some kids quote baseball stats. One evening, you find him in the garden tracing constellations in the sky with his tutor, pointing to a star and whispering, "That's where my empire will reach." The man chuckles nervously, thinking it's just boyish fantasy. But the look in Mehmed's eyes, no, that's not fantasy. That's prophecy wrapped in teenage arrogance. Still, ruling an empire isn't a game of chess on a carpet. You can sense the unease in the corridors. Courtiers exchange letters like daggers. Diplomats hide smiles behind wine cups. When word spreads that Christian armies from Hungary and Poland are planning another crusade, panic spreads faster than a sneeze in winter. The boy Sultan must lead his armies or watch everything crumble. And here's where it gets awkward. Imagine you're 12, and every general twice your age thinks you're just playing dress-up with a crown. They don't follow orders so much as humour them. The viziers start advising him, which, in Ottoman politics, usually means running the empire in his name. Mehmed fumes, pacing through the palace, muttering in multiple languages like a caffeinated linguist. Finally, he sends a letter to his father. "If you are Sultan, come and lead your armies. If I am Sultan, I order you to come and lead your armies." A cheeky teenager with royal stationery, right? Murad sighs, rides out of retirement, and defeats the crusaders at Varna. The boy watches from the sidelines, absorbing every detail: the smell of gunpowder, the rhythm of drums, the thunder of cavalry charges. You can almost hear his mind taking notes. Next time, he'll be ready. But the court has had enough. They whisper that Mehmed's too young, too impulsive. Within months, Murad is recalled to the throne. The boy's reign ends almost before it begins. He's sent back to the shadows, to study, to wait. It's humiliating. Imagine being fired from your first job because your dad's better at it. But that humiliation burns into something else: resolve. You follow him through the gardens at night. The torches flicker as he kneels beside a pond, tossing stones into the reflection of the moon. Every splash sounds like a vow. He studies strategy by candlelight, sketching fortresses in the margins of his notebooks. He learns Latin so he can read Roman accounts of sieges firsthand. He drills soldiers in secret, experimenting with formations no one's seen before. And somewhere in the distance, Constantinople gleams like a forbidden jewel. The last fragment of the Byzantine Empire, one city standing between him and the dream of a unified realm. Even at 13, Mehmed can't stop thinking about it. He reads about Theodosius, Constantine, Justinian men who built worlds out of ambition. He writes in his journal that he too will build a world that will never die. Cute, in a terrifyingly prophetic way. When Murad finally dies a few years later, Mehmed returns not as a boy, but as a storm. He's 19 now, tall, silent, his voice lower, his patience thinner. The palace smells of lavender oil and iron, the scent of a ruler who has learned what power costs. His first decree is simple: reinforce the treasury, rebuild the navy, and, oh yes, prepare for the greatest siege the world has ever seen. Historians still argue whether Mehmed was destined for greatness or merely obsessed with proving himself. You stand there, watching him sketch Constantinople's walls on parchment, lips moving as he counts distances. The boy Sultan is gone. What remains is a man who intends to swallow legends whole and wash them down with empire. In the flicker of the lamp, he murmurs to no one in particular. They called me the child Sultan. Soon, they will call me conqueror. You can almost feel the temperature drop. The candles quiver. Somewhere beyond the palace gates, the drums of destiny begin their slow, rhythmic beat. You wake before dawn in the same palace that once echoed with a boy's frustration. The air hums with new purpose, now orders, messengers, maps rolled and unrolled across every table. Mehmed is 19, and his dreams are taller than the minarets around you. He doesn't talk about Constantinople anymore. He calculates it angles, distances, troop counts, grain rations. You can almost see numbers floating behind his eyes. The room smells of parchment and candle wax. Advisors shuffle nervously as the young Sultan points to the Bosporus on a map, his finger tracing a narrow throat of water connecting two seas. Control this, he murmurs, and you control the world. He's not wrong. Outside, the empire still wakes slowly, donkeys braying, smiths striking sparks, coffee brewing in brass pots. You might think this empire runs on religion or gold, but no, it runs on logistics. Mehmed knows it too. He rebuilds roads, hires engineers, and demands new ships before the carpenters even finish their morning tea. Historians still argue whether this was genius or pure mania, but from where you stand, it's both. Every evening, he walks the palace gardens, whispering to himself about Rome. You follow silently, sandals crunching gravel, listening to that restless rhythm. The prophet promised us Constantinople, he says, half to you, half to the night air, and a great commander shall take it. He pauses, smiling faintly. Why shouldn't that commander be me? The empire isn't fully convinced. His generals, men with weathered faces and hands scarred from sieges, whisper that Constantinople is impossible. Its walls are 40 feet high, layered like a cake of death. They've seen catapults fail, armies vanish, saints supposedly appear on ramparts. But Mehmed doesn't believe in luck or saints. He believes in mathematics. One morning, you find him in a workshop beneath the palace. The place smells like wet clay and iron filings. Hammers ring, fires roar, and in the middle stands a Hungarian engineer named Orban. The man's building something monstrous, 2 bronze cannon barrels thick enough to swallow a man whole. You watch molten metal flow into molds as Mehmed leans close, eyes glinting in the furnace light. Bigger, he says quietly. Make it big enough to shake heaven. And Orban does. The finished cannon, Basilica, they'll call it, can fire a stone ball the weight of an ox. You feel the floor tremble the first time it roars, echoing across Edirne's hills. Birds scatter like smoke. People cross themselves or whisper prayers in the streets. Somewhere, an old monk writes in his diary that the earth itself groaned. Meanwhile, Mehmed tightens his circle. Spies slip through markets. Scouts map Byzantine supply routes. He orders a fortress, Rumeli Hisar, to be built on the European side of the Bosporus, right under the emperor's nose. Day by day, you watch its towers rise like clenched fists from the cliffs. Fishermen below mutter that the Sultan's new castle blocks the sun by noon. By midsummer, the fortress gleams in fresh limestone, its gates hung with iron. When a Venetian ship dares to pass without permission, Mehmed gives his first unmistakable lesson in Ottoman diplomacy. The cannon fires once, twice, then silence, except for the floating wreckage. The message is clear. No one crosses without paying the toll. You might think such audacity would bring war immediately. Instead, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI sends polite letters, offering peace and gifts, maybe even tribute. Mehmed reads them while feeding figs to his falcon. "Tribute," he mutters, wiping his fingers, "as if I were some beggar." He tears the letter neatly in half and tosses it into the brazier. The falcon screeches, and you can't tell if it's approval or warning. At night, Mehmed reads ancient histories of Troy and Rome. You sit nearby, drowsy in the candlelight, as he murmurs passages in Latin. "They say the Romans built a city that never fell," he muses. "I will build one that never sleeps." There's a fringe story, half rumour, half prophecy, that the young Sultan once summoned a Greek astrologer to read his future. The old man studied the stars, frowned, and said, "You will capture Constantinople, but your heart will know no peace." Mehmed smiled. Then peace is overrated. He's already designing a new capital in his mind, mosques, markets, gardens spilling into the sea. But before he can build, he must destroy. And that's the part you're beginning to sense in the tremor of his voice, when he talks about necessity. Every day, another caravan leaves for the front, ox carts groaning under cannonballs the size of furniture. Artillery crews practice loading drills until their arms shake. Mehmed walks among them, silent, memorizing faces, measuring fear. He's surprisingly gentle sometimes, pats a soldier's shoulder, asks about his family, then orders him to march at dawn. Still, there's humour here, buried under the iron. When one of his cooks complains that the cannons scare the palace cats, Mehmed chuckles. "Tell the cats they serve a sultan who will shake the heavens," he says. "If they can't handle thunder, they'll never handle history." By early spring, the army gathers outside Edirne. Hundreds of thousands of men, banners flapping, horses stamping frost from the ground. You stand in the cold wind, watching the Sultan ride past, armour gleaming like molten gold under the sunrise. The drums roll, the muezzins chant, and for a moment it feels less like war and more like prophecy setting out for a stroll. Historians still argue whether he truly believed divine fate was on his side, or if he just knew the power of a good narrative. Either way, you're swept along in it, the rhythm, the certainty, the strange calm before a storm that everyone knows is coming. Somewhere far ahead, beyond the Marmara's glittering horizon, Constantinople waits. You imagine its walls catching the dawn light, old and proud and utterly unprepared for what's coming. And in your mind, you can already hear the distant thunder of bronze. The road to Constantinople stretches before you like a dusty ribbon, lined with olive groves and restless soldiers. You can taste the salt of the nearby sea as Mehmed's army rolls forward, a living machine of men, horses, and cannon. At the head, the Sultan rides silent, his eyes fixed on the faint blue silhouette of the city that has haunted him since boyhood. Every step of the march feels rehearsed. You pass through Thracian villages, whitewashed homes, smoke curling from chimneys. The locals watch in stunned silence as wagons creak past loaded with bronze monsters. The cannons, those shimmering symbols of ambition, glint in the sunlight like sleeping dragons. A muezzin's call floats across the plains. The soldiers pause to pray, their ranks folding like the tides. You stand among them, feeling the earth vibrate beneath thousands of boots. It's not anger that drives them. It's something colder, quieter, discipline born of inevitability. At night, the camp glows under 100 lanterns. Fires crackle, stew bubbles, and someone plucks a saz softly near the river. You wander between tents, catching fragments of gossip. Some swear the walls of Constantinople are guarded by angels. Others claim the Byzantines keep holy relics that blind their enemies. Mehmed doesn't dismiss any of it. He listens, nods, then calmly instructs his engineers to prepare countermeasures for miracles. He's that kind of ruler, half scientist, half mystic. In one tent you find him bent over blueprints with Orban, the Hungarian cannon maker. The smell of oil and iron fills your nostrils. "She'll fire once every 2 hours, Orban explains, pointing to the massive barrel drawn in ink. Mehmed taps the parchment thoughtfully. "Then we'll need 6 of her." He looks up, the faintest grin curling his lips. Rome wasn't conquered with patience. The first test shot happens 2 days later on the open plain. The cannon bellows, the world blurs, and the earth itself seems to gasp. When the smoke clears, a boulder the size of a carriage has vanished into the horizon. Soldiers cheer, half in awe, half in fear. You cover your ears a second too late. Your bones still hum hours afterward. "Beautiful," Mehmed murmurs. His tone isn't triumphant, it's affectionate, like a painter admiring his favorite brushstroke. The next morning, Constantinople appears in the distance. Rising from the sea like a myth, its domes gleam in the sunlight, the great walls casting long shadows over the Golden Horn. You feel small, almost reverent. Even Mehmed pauses, eyes narrowing. "So," he whispers, "the Queen of Cities still wears her crown." He sets up camp on the plain of Maltepe, where the grass will soon burn black under cannon fire. The Byzantines watch from their towers, bells tolling faintly. Inside those walls is Emperor Constantine XI, proud, weary, clutching the last breath of a dying empire. Mehmed sends an envoy offering peace in exchange for surrender. Constantine responds with the kind of dignity that belongs only to men who already suspect they're doomed. To surrender the city would be to betray God himself. The Sultan reads the letter twice, then folds it neatly. "So be it," he says. "Let God decide whose city this is." Historians still argue whether Mehmed truly gave the Byzantines a chance to avoid destruction, or whether this was all theatre. Either way, the script is now locked. The siege begins at dawn. You can feel it before you see it. The tremor of cannon wheels rolling into position, the dull rhythm of hammers driving stakes. Birds scatter, dogs bark, and the city braces itself. Then comes the first roar. The sky flashes, the ground quakes, and stone dust rises like a storm cloud. The great Theodosian walls, unbreachable for 1,000 years, shudder for the first time. By noon, the city smells of lime and smoke. You climb a ridge and watch the spectacle unfold. Soldiers load, fire, reload, their bodies slick with sweat. Gunners shout commands in Turkish, Greek, and Arabic. Every language of the empire seems to echo here. At one point, a massive cannonball splinters against the wall, sending chunks of marble tumbling into the moat. The men cheer, but Mehmed doesn't. He only nods once, eyes never leaving the breach. As dusk falls, he orders the bombardment to pause. The silence afterward is eerie, like the world is holding its breath. You can hear the faint clinking of Byzantine church bells, the muffled prayers drifting across the water. Later that night, you join Mehmed in his command tent. He sits cross-legged on a rug, polishing a small brass astrolabe. "Do you believe in fate?" he asks suddenly, without looking up. You hesitate. His gaze flicks toward you, sharp as steel. "Fate," he says, "is just the name men give to the things they're too afraid to build." Then, as if to underline the point, he sketches another set of cannon placements on parchment. He barely sleeps, just catnaps between bursts of calculation. You realize this siege isn't just war, it's a personal thesis. A curious rumor drifts through camp. A white comet has been seen over the Marmara. The soldiers whisper that it's a sign the heavens approving the Sultan's war. Even the Byzantines notice it and tremble. But Mehmed, when told, only smirks. "Good," he says. "Then even the stars will witness how history is written." The following days turn the plain into chaos. Cannons thunder day and night. Dust turns the sky sepia. Birds stop singing. Even the sea seems tired. You walk among the trenches and smell the mixture of sweat, salt, and gunpowder, a strange perfume of destiny. And through it all, Mehmed moves like a ghost, calm, relentless, perfectly still in his purpose. He eats sparingly, speaks rarely, but when he does, men listen. "We are not here to destroy," he reminds them, "but to inherit." Still, the cracks in the wall widen. The dream he's chased since childhood is finally within reach, though it glows red with fire. Somewhere beyond the smoke, a church bell tolls again, slower this time, like the city itself is counting down. Morning arrives, grey and heavy. You can almost taste the metal in the air, the residue of gunpowder and damp earth. The cannons start again before sunrise, shaking the tents and rattling your bones. You step outside into the smoke-soaked dawn, and there it is. The city of Constantine, still standing, stubbornly glowing under the pale light as if daring the world to take it. Mehmed is already at the lines, his cloak drawn tight, boots sinking into the mud. Around him, officers bark orders, and runners dash between batteries. The Sultan doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His silence carries farther than the drums. Each cannon shot blooms like thunder, echoing across the Marmara. Chunks of the Great Wall tumble into the moat. You watch work crews, bare-armed, soot-streaked haulstones aside, while engineers measure the cracks like doctors checking a pulse. "She's weakening," one mutters. Mehmed just nods. "So am I," he answers softly, "but I'll hold longer." In the city, the Byzantines ring their bells, calling everyone priests, merchants, fishermen to the ramparts. Through your spyglass, you see them patching breaches with barrels, furniture, even marble from churches. Their banners flutter red and gold, saints painted on cloth that flaps like wounded wings. Historians still argue whether Mehmed admired them or despised them. Watching him now, you suspect both. He respects resistance almost as much as he enjoys crushing it. The siege drags on, rain turns the plains to sludge. Cannon crews wrap rags around their ears, horses whinny at every blast, and sleep becomes a rumour. One night, lightning forks across the sky and strikes near the gun lines. Soldiers scream that it's divine wrath. Mehmed calmly notes the trajectory. "Good," he says. "Even the heavens fire for us." A strange peace settles in the pauses between bombardments. You find yourself listening to small sounds. A kettle boiling, a soldier humming, the whisper of prayer beads sliding through calloused fingers. In those moments, the siege feels almost domestic, like a grim neighborhood feud that's gone on too long. Then the tunnels begin. Ottoman miners crawl under the walls, carving through damp soil with picks and shovels, hoping to plant explosives beneath the foundations. You crouch beside one, feeling the claustrophobic air, hearing the muffled echo of picks from the other side, the Byzantines digging counter-tunnels. Somewhere down there, men are fighting in the dark, blades flashing by candlelight, history written in whispers and dust. A week later, Mehmed orders a night assault to test the defences. You follow as ladders rise like skeletal fingers against the walls. Arrows hiss down, firepots burst, screams echo. The moon watches, cold and indifferent. You see a janissary beside you catch a flaming arrow in his shield, his face half-lit like a demon from a fresco. "It's fine," he grins, teeth glowing. "Keeps the night warm." You manage a weak laugh. Even in war, gallows humour keeps men sane. The attack fails repelled by boiling oil and desperate courage. By dawn, the plain is littered with scorched ladders and torn banners. Mehmed walks among the wounded, silent. He doesn't rage or curse. He simply kneels beside a dying soldier, takes his hand, and whispers something you can't hear. Then he stands, eyes cold as marble. "They've shown their faith," he says. "Now we'll show ours." For a day, he halts the bombardment. The city breathes, cautiously. Smoke lifts, revealing broken domes and shattered statues. You'd think mercy has arrived, but no. Mehmed is just studying. He paces along the lines, sketching new firing arcs in the dirt, recalculating angles. A scholar at work, revising his thesis in fire and stone. That evening, an envoy returns from the city with another offer. Gold, titles, maybe even alliance. Mehmed listens patiently, then pours a glass of sherbet and says, "If they surrender, I will spare their lives. If not, I'll own their bones." The envoy swallows hard and rides back alone through the twilight. A quirky fact drifts through the camp that night. Some soldiers swear they've seen white pigeons roosting only on the Sultan's tent, as if divine messengers favour his command. The cooks, unimpressed, just complain the birds keep stealing their bread. Still, morale rises. The breaches widen daily. The cannons roar less like tools and more like destiny clearing its throat. The Byzantines are running out of everything: arrows, hope, time. One dusk, you stand beside Mehmed as the setting sun stains the sea red. "Do you ever fear failure?" you ask quietly. He smiles without looking at you. "Only in matters of poetry." Then he turns toward the city, eyes catching the light like molten gold. "They built their walls to keep the world out," he murmurs. "I'll break them to let the world in." The final assault is coming. You can feel it in the way the camp grows quieter, more focused. No songs tonight, just sharpening blades, whispered prayers, and the faint crackle of fires burning down to ash. Somewhere across the moat, the defenders light candles in their windows. From a distance, Constantinople glows like a floating constellation, one that knows it's about to fall from the sky. You close your eyes and let the cannon thunder fade into your heartbeat. The night smells of salt, smoke, and prophecy. The morning air tastes of iron and wet ash. The siege has been going for weeks now, long enough that even the sunrise feels tired. You wake to the dull rhythm of drums, the rustle of armor, and the low murmuring of men praying in a dozen different languages. The air is thick with smoke and anticipation. Mehmed steps out of his tent, his cloak damp from the mist, his gaze steady on the city's scarred silhouette. The walls still stand cracked, pitted, exhausted, but they still stand. Constantinople refuses to die quietly. "Enough testing," he says, voice low but carrying. "It's time." You follow him through the maze of trenches. Cannon crews adjust their aim. Soldiers check ropes and ladders. The great bombard, basilica, looms ahead, its bronze skin blackened, its barrel warm from the night's firing. The gunners stand ready, their faces lit by the pale dawn. When Mehmed raises his hand, the world holds its breath. Then he lowers it, and thunder rolls across the plain. The first salvo shatters the air. The ground jumps beneath your boots. Dust and smoke swallow everything. When it clears, the central gate of Street Romanus gapes like a wounded mouth. You can see the inner wall now, half exposed. The Byzantines scramble to patch it with beams and rubble. You almost pity them, almost. Mehmed doesn't blink. "Again," he says, and the guns answer. Each impact sends up geysers of debris. Birds flee to the sea. Even the waves seem to recoil. You hear the screams of men you'll never meet and feel the pulse of history breaking its own bones. But this isn't just violence, it's choreography. Between barrages, janissaries march in perfect rhythm, shields flashing, pikes angled like silver reeds. Behind them, sappers drag bundles of brushwood to fill the moat. The Sultan walks among them, calm as a conductor tuning his orchestra. Historians still argue whether he planned every detail or simply rode chaos with genius-level balance. But standing here, you see something else. Obsession so deep it becomes serenity. That night, the Byzantines launch a desperate counterattack. From the ramparts, flaming arrows streak into the dark like dying comets. Greek fire hisses, a green snake twisting through the night sky. It lands near the Ottoman lines, lighting up the mud like a molten river. Men scream, tents go up in sparks. You can feel the heat even from 100 yards away. Mehmed doesn't retreat. He stands in the glow, his face haloed by flame. "Let it burn," he murmurs. "Tomorrow, it will be theirs." The next day, the Sultan summons his council. You stand at the edge of the pavilion as maps cover every surface. Advisors plead for patience. The Janissary commanders warn of exhaustion. Mehmed listens in silence, fingers tapping the hilt of his sword. Finally, he says, "Patience is for those who can afford to wait. I cannot." He orders a grand assault. All troops, all engines, all hope everything at once. The hour is set before dawn on May 29th, 1453. The order spreads like fire through the ranks. Tomorrow, the city falls. You hardly sleep that night. The air hums with prayer and sharpening steel. Some soldiers sing softly, others write names in the dirt. A few stare at the walls as if memorizing their enemy. And somewhere in the distance, church bells ring inside Constantinople. The last liturgy before the end. Before dawn, the camp erupts into motion. Torches blaze, drums thunder. The Sultan rides forward, his white horse glistening with dew. He speaks to his men, not shouting but steady, like a father before battle. "Paradise lies beyond those walls," he tells them. "And for those who survive history, you feel it in your chest. That strange mix of dread and awe. The kind that makes the world feel smaller and eternity closer." Then the horns sound. The first wave surges irregular troops from the Balkan provinces, their job to exhaust the defenders. They climb, fall, climb again. Arrows slice through the air, stones rain down, boiling water splashes like angry rain. You duck instinctively, though you're not even on the wall. When they falter, the Anatolian corps rushes in, disciplined and grim. Drums pound in your ears, smoke turns the world grey. You glimpse Mehmed on horseback, shouting commands, his hand pointing like a compass needle toward destiny. And then the Janissaries, the elite, silent as the grave, faces wrapped in cloth, eyes bright as torchlight. They move like a tide that doesn't know fear. Their ladders slam against the wall. Grappling hooks bite into stone. One by one, they climb, step by step, until the wall disappears under a forest of spears. It's chaos and prayer and noise. But within that noise, you can hear something faint, the rhythmic chant of the Janissaries rising above the clash. Allah, 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 Allah. The words roll like thunder across centuries. Inside the city, the defenders break formation. The emperor himself fights at the breach Constantine XI, sword in hand, crown dented, shouting encouragement. You catch glimpses of him through the smoke, a man holding an empire by sheer force of will. For a heartbeat, it feels like the Byzantines might hold. Then Basilica fires one last time. The explosion tears through the wall, through prayer, through legend. The gate collapses inward, dragging stone and men into the moat. You feel the shockwave in your ribs. When the dust clears, Janissaries pour through the gap, shouting, flags rising like black sails. You've just witnessed the end of 1,000 years. The sun breaks over the horizon, gilding the chaos in gold. You can't tell if it's dawn or judgment day. By noon, the Ottoman banner flies from the highest tower. You turn to find Mehmed standing in the rubble, sword lowered, eyes distant. "The city is ours," he says softly. Then, almost to himself, "And now begins the harder conquest of hearts." Historians still argue whether he wept that day. You don't see tears, only the faintest tremor in his jaw, the kind that comes when a dream finally costs what it's worth. Behind him, Constantinople burns and prays at once. The smoke still lingers over the shattered walls as you walk beside Mehmed into the conquered city. The streets are choked with silence, an eerie, heavy quiet that feels thicker than ash. You step through the gate of Street Romanus, the same gate that had withstood 1,000 sieges, now a gaping wound in stone. The Sultan doesn't ride this time. He walks. His boots crunch over fragments of marble and broken shields, the hem of his cloak brushing blood and dust alike. There's no cheer in his victory march, no music, only the faint echo of boots against ruin. To your left, a fallen statue of an emperor lies split in two, its face buried in the dirt. A stray cat winds through its hollow eye socket. To your right, a toppled column leans against a chapel wall, its carvings of saints smeared with soot. And through the ruins, the sound of bells. Not ringing, crying. You follow Mehmed as he halts before the Hagia Sophia, the grand cathedral that has stood for nearly a millennium. Its dome glows faintly under the morning haze, still magnificent despite cracked mosaics and shattered windows. The great bronze doors hang open, bent and broken. The Sultan removes his shoes, steps inside, and looks up at the golden ceiling, where the last sunlight of Byzantium flickers across Christ's mosaic. For a long moment, no one speaks. You can feel history folding itself quietly, like parchment. Then he says, softly but clearly, "There is no God but God." A Janissary calls the Adhan, the first Islamic prayer ever heard within those ancient walls. The sound rises, mingles with the echo of bells, and for the briefest instant, two empires overlap. Historians still argue whether Mehmed's conversion of the cathedral to a mosque was an act of faith or triumphal symbolism. You just stand there, breathing in centuries of incense and dust, feeling something enormous pass through the air like the city itself sighing in surrender. Later, as the sun dips low, Mehmed climbs to the gallery overlooking the city. From there, Constantinople looks almost peaceful again. Smoke rising in thin threads, the Bosporus shining like a molten path toward Asia. He rests his hands on the railing, eyes unfocused. A soldier approaches hesitantly, bowing. "My Sultan," he begins, "shall we begin the cleansing?" Mehmed's jaw tightens. "Spare those who yield," he says. "Let them keep their homes. Let priests return to their churches." A city ruled by fear dies slower, but dies all the same. Then, after a pause, "But the soldiers may take their reward." You watch the city descend into 3 days of chaos. Doors splinter, cries echo, and gold changes hands faster than prayers. It's a grim symphony of triumph and tragedy. Yet, amid it, Mehmed remains composed, sleeping little, speaking less. He orders food for the survivors. He restores order with a single decree. This city is no longer Constantinople. It is now Istanbul, the city of Islam. The word rolls through the streets like a spell. Still, The Sultan's gaze keeps drifting upward to the domes, the arches, the broken spires. Rebuild it, he tells his architects. Make it breathe again. That night, he walks the ruins with only a few guards and you. The air smells of smoke, salt, and candle wax. In a half-collapsed courtyard, he finds an old Byzantine scholar clutching a chest of scrolls. The man trembles, expecting death. Instead, Mehmed kneels, opens the chest, and lifts a scroll. Plato, he reads aloud, smiling faintly. Good choice. He orders the man taken to the palace not as a prisoner, but as a guest. Knowledge, he murmurs, belongs to no nation. It's easy to forget that this conqueror quotes Aristotle between battles. But even his scholars whisper that he could recite verses from the Quran and Greek philosophy in the same breath. Some say he even commissioned Latin translations for his private library. Still, the new city will not rise gently. He orders Christian and Muslim architects to rebuild side by side. Churches become mosques, monasteries become schools. Slaves are freed if they can build or teach. The Sultan personally oversees plans for a grand palace, the Topkapi, designed not as a fortress, but as a vision of eternal empire. You walk with him through the half-finished courtyards, where the scent of wet plaster mixes with the tang of seawater. Workers hum songs in Turkish, Greek, Albanian languages blending like wet paint. See? Mehmed says, gesturing around him. Even the stones are learning to speak to each other, and for a moment you almost believe him. But beneath the reconstruction hums something darker. You sense it in his pacing, in the way he stares at the city walls long after they've stopped smoking. He has what he wanted: Constantinople, Rome's dream reborn, and yet he seems uneasy, restless. One evening, you find him alone in Hagia Sophia again, seated beneath a hanging lamp. "Do you hear it?" he asks. "Hear what?" You whisper. "The silence," he says. "It's too heavy. A city should breathe." Outside, the moon glows over the Bosporus, silver light trembling on the water. The seagulls cry, and the air cools as night deepens. Mehmed finally rises, brushes the dust from his robes, and turns to you with a faint smile. "Tomorrow," he says, "we start building again. But never forget, building and breaking are brothers." As you follow him out, you realize the conquest wasn't just about land or faith. It was about creation, the terrifying kind that first destroys, then rebuilds. Somewhere in the night, the bells ring again, softer now, almost like a lullaby. The wind off the Bosporus carries a new scent: fresh plaster, cedar shavings, sea salt, and something else beneath it all: ambition. Weeks have passed since the city fell, yet the rhythm of conquest hasn't slowed. If anything, it has changed tempo, turned from war drums into chisels, hammers, and the scratch of pen on parchment. You walk beside Mehmed through what was once the hippodrome. The great arena lies in ruins, but already workmen are clearing stones, measuring the space for fountains and markets. The Sultan stops to study a shattered marble horse from the old Byzantine statues, its muzzle broken, its eyes still defiant. He touches the stone gently. "Even the conquered have dignity," he says. Then, after a pause, "That's what makes them worth conquering." He turns, gestures toward the harbour. There, ships unload lumber, marble, silks, and scholars. Yes, scholars. Caravans arrive not with gold but with books. Manuscripts from Persia, maps from Venice, scrolls rescued from monasteries that once feared him. The city smells of ink and ash, like knowledge being reborn. Still, whispers run through the narrow alleys. The Greek families who stayed speak of the boy conqueror, who walks like a philosopher but punishes like a storm. One day, you pass through the bazaar and see an old woman blessing a wall before hanging a cross there. A janissary moves to stop her, but Mehmed, riding by, simply says, "Let her." A prayer is a harmless thing. Historians still argue whether this tolerance was strategy or sincerity. You suspect it was both. Power, he knows, survives best when it pretends to be merciful. Yet under the civility, something feral still glimmers. You see it that afternoon when a group of captured Genoese mercenaries are brought before him. They had fought fiercely during the siege, killing dozens of Ottoman soldiers before retreating. One of them, wounded but defiant, spits at the Sultan's boots. The court falls silent. Mehmed looks at him for a long moment, then says, "A brave man should die standing." He orders the man released to the astonishment of everyone present. As the guards hesitate, he adds, "But let his comrades watch." The Genoese walks 10 steps into the courtyard before an archer looses a single arrow. The man collapses without a sound. The Sultan doesn't look away. "Mercy," he says, "must have discipline." Later that night, you find him in his study, overlooking the sea. A single lamp burns, its flame trembling in the draught. He's writing pages of notes in Arabic and Greek. You glimpse phrases like "justice through awe" and "fear as architecture." His handwriting is precise, calm. You write as if building another city, you say. He doesn't look up. "Every ruler must build 2, he replies. One of stone, one of memory. Outside, the rain begins. The sound fills the chamber like soft applause. A strange rumour makes its rounds the next day. Mehmed has begun commissioning artists to paint portraits of him in the Western style. Not miniatures, but full oil paintings, something no Muslim ruler has dared. The old clerics grumble, the young poets cheer. You watch as an Italian painter unpacks his brushes, clearly terrified. The Sultan sits for him, expression unreadable. "Make me look," he says, "as if I'm thinking of something I can't tell you." The painter laughs nervously. "And what is that, my lord?" Mehmed smiles slightly. "Tomorrow." He's not joking. By now, the rebuilt walls shine white in the Sunday traders' return, markets reopen, and the city begins to hum again. Yet there's an edge beneath the hum fear disguised as reverence. When Mehmed rides through the streets, people bow too quickly, too deeply. Even the wind seems to hush. One evening, you accompany him to the Galata quarter, where the Genoese merchants live under new treaties. The Sultan inspects the shipyards, praises the craftsmanship, then turns to the Venetian envoy. "You may trade freely," he says pleasantly. "But remember, freedom is a gift, not a habit." The envoy nods, sweating through his silk doublet. A small boy, watching from a doorway, drops a wooden toy. Mehmed picks it up, examines the carving, a tiny horse, simple but detailed, and smiles. "Did you make this?" he asks in Turkish. The boy nods. The Sultan hands it back. "Good. Build things. Don't destroy them." Then, quietly to you, "If only men listened as well as children carve." That night, the Sultan dines with his viziers. The meal is simple: grilled fish, olives, bread. Between bites, he asks, "Do you know what makes a city eternal?" One advisor suggests faith. Another says trade. A third, law. Mehmed shakes his head. "Memory," he says, "and fear. The first keeps people returning. The second keeps them behaving." The laughter that follows is polite, thin. Later, as the hall empties, you linger at the window. The Bosporus gleams under moonlight. Across the water, torchlights flicker on the Asian shore, another fortress rising under Mehmed's orders. Even victory isn't enough. He's already building toward another. Historians still argue whether he was planning to march on Rome itself. He certainly read about it enough. In his private collection, he keeps a Latin copy of Caesar's commentaries beside a Quran and a manual of Persian architecture. When he opens any of them, he traces lines with the same fingertip he uses to direct armies. You realize something unsettling. Mehmed doesn't crave land, or gold, or even power. He craves permanence. He wants to outlast time itself. In the dark, you hear him murmur, as if to the sea. "They will forget the emperors before me. They will forget the kings after. But they will remember me." The waves answer in whispers, breaking gently against the shore. Somewhere in the city, a nightingale begins to sing soft, defiant, beautiful. For a moment, even the conqueror closes his eyes. Days stretch into months, and the city no longer smells of fire. Instead, it smells of mortar dust, roasted chestnuts, and ambition. Istanbul is alive again, but it's not the same city. It's a reflection of Mehmed's mind, methodical, grand, and quietly terrifying. You walk with him through the half-finished courtyards of the new palace on the Seraglio Point. The sea glitters on both sides, gulls wheel above, and masons chip at marble under a sun that never seems to tire. Each stone must face Mecca, he reminds the architects, his voice even. Then, smiling slightly, but makes sure the breeze still smells of the sea, he's learning to balance faith with beauty, empire with pleasure. Everywhere you go, You hear languages blending, Persian merchants haggling beside Greek stonemasons, Armenian goldsmiths sharing tea with Arab calligraphers. It's chaotic and strangely peaceful. Mehmed listens to them all, collecting words like a linguist and secrets like a spy. Historians still argue whether his tolerance was genuine curiosity or cold calculation. Watching him stroll through the bazaars, pausing to ask a monk about astronomy or a sailor about wind currents, you start to think maybe both. One afternoon he invites you to the palace gardens. The tulips are in bloom, their colours too bright against the grey stones. He kneels beside a patch of red ones and says, "They grow better in disturbed soil." He means the flowers, but also everything else. A messenger interrupts, bowing low. "The Sultan of Karaman defies your command." Mehmed sighs. Then he must be reminded. You ride out with him days later south toward Anatolia, through hills that smell of pine and gun oil. The army moves like a machine again, wheels grinding, banners snapping. But this time, there's no glory in his face. Only irritation. "Rebellion," he mutters, "is not courage, it's forgetfulness." When they reach the rebel fortress, there is no siege. Mehmed orders the cannons set up on one side, fires a single volley, and sends word, "Surrender before the smoke clears." The gates open within an hour. The rebel governor kneels before him, trembling. Mehmed studies him like a tutor disappointed in a student. "I give you two choices," he says quietly. "Loyalty or legend." The man chooses loyalty. He's still executed. "Loyalty," Mehmed remarks later, "is more convincing when people see what happens to the disloyal." The words slide out like silk, but the chill stays behind. On the ride back, you stop at a monastery turned library. Monks now copy Arabic texts beside Ottoman scribes. The abbot bows deeply when Mehmed enters. "My Sultan, we are preserving Aristotle's lost works." "Good," Mehmed says. "He believed the universe was eternal. I intend to test that." There's laughter, but it fades quickly. That evening, by campfire, he looks west toward Europe, and you can almost feel his thoughts reaching across the horizon. "Rome," he whispers, "is just another Constantinople waiting for its dream to end." The fire pops. Somewhere, a night wolf howls. Back in Istanbul, he redoubles the rebuilding. He commissions bridges, aqueducts, and gardens. He founds madrasas where geometry is taught beside theology, where students study Latin texts under Muslim scholars. His advisors warn it's risky mixing worlds. He replies, "A mind grows sharper when it argues with itself." But for every scholar invited, there's a traitor punished. Mehmed's spies multiply. Rumours of executions slip through the alleys like fog. One courtier jokes that the Sultan now trusts only his architect, and even then, only from a distance. Yet amid the cruelty, there are moments of odd tenderness. He adopts an orphaned Greek boy found during the siege and names him Hassan. The child becomes his shadow, running through the gardens while Mehmed dictates orders. One day, you hear the boy ask, "Why do people fear you, father?" The Sultan smiles faintly. "Because they don't understand that I fear myself more." That answer follows you for days. You begin to notice how he paces before dawn, restless, as if chasing something only he can see. One morning, you catch him staring at a mirror, studying his own reflection. "Do you see him?" he asks quietly. "The boy who wanted this?" He chuckles hollowly. "He died at the gate, I think." And then, almost too softly to hear, "But I can't bury him." The empire thrives. New provinces submit, trade routes open, but the man at its center grows heavier with silence. The poets praise him, the priests curse him, the merchants enrich him. None truly know him. You begin to realize that's exactly how he wants it. Still, he keeps building, always building. The city spreads outward like a thought that refuses to end. At night, torchlight glows on scaffolding, and the sound of chisels mingles with the call to prayer. One evening, as the wind turns colder, you climb the walls overlooking the sea. Mehmed joins you, cloak snapping behind him. "Look at it," he says, "the lights, the bridges, the domes. My dream has weight now. I can hear it breathe." You nod, though you're not sure whether he's proud or frightened. Maybe both. A ship passes below, its lantern flickering on the waves. The Sultan watches it fade into the distance. People think conquest ends when the gates fall, he says softly. But the hardest battles are the ones you fight inside the walls you've built yourself. Then he turns, his face lit by the moon. We'll ride again soon, he adds. There's still work to do. You know better than to ask where. You wake to the sound of rain on marble. Outside, the domes of the city shimmer under a silver dawn, but Mehmed isn't there to admire them. He's gone marching north again. This time, the air hums with a different kind of tension, colder, sharper. The Sultan's gaze is fixed, not on Rome or the sea, but across the Danube, toward a name that still echoes in his nightmares. Vlad. You ride through fog-drenched valleys where the trees twist like blackened spears. The army moves cautiously. The horses snort at shadows. In every village you pass, doors hang open, hearths still warm but no people, only silence. Then the smell hits you sweet, metallic, unmistakable. When the mist clears, you see them. The forest, thousands of bodies impaled on wooden stakes, stretching as far as the horizon. Birds circle overhead. Wolves prowl at the edges. The rain turns everything slick and shining, like some grotesque sculpture garden. Mehmed halts his horse. Even the soldiers stop breathing. For once, the Sultan says nothing. Historians still argue whether this was the exact number 20,000, 40, but what matters isn't the count, it's the message. Vlad the Impaler has answered empire with spectacle. You glance at Mehmed. His face doesn't twist in anger or horror. It stays perfectly still. So, he murmurs at last. He thinks fear is a throne. He spurs his horse forward, straight through the field of stakes. You have to follow, though your stomach knots with every step. The dead sway gently in the wind, faces blurred by rain, their hands like pale petals. A janissary mutters a prayer. Another vomits. Mehmed rides on, his cloak brushing corpses. If he rules by terror, he says quietly, then we'll see whose kingdom lasts longer. You reach the walls of Targovishte days later. The place is deserted. Vlad has vanished into the Carpathian mist, leaving only burned granaries and poisoned wells. Mehmed dismounts, studies the smouldering ruins. He learned this from me, he whispers, not proudly, not sadly, just acknowledging the echo. At night, campfires flicker in the dark forest. Soldiers tell stories to keep the cold away, wolves that speak Latin, ghosts of the impaled. You listen, but your eyes keep drifting to the Sultan's tent, lit dimly from within. Inside, he sits cross-legged on a rug, writing by lamplight. What are you recording? You ask. He looks up. How monsters are made, he says. One cruelty at a time. The rain returns before dawn. The campaign ends not in conquest, but exhaustion. Vlad vanishes, his legend growing stronger than any army. Mehmed returns south in silence, but the lessons travel with him. Back in Istanbul, he gathers his council. Some urge another campaign, others suggest diplomacy. Mehmed listens, smiling faintly. Diplomacy, he says, is just war with napkins. The room laughs nervously. He changes the subject to education, to trade, to art. If fear can rule men, he says, knowledge can rule centuries. And so begins his strangest phase yet. The scholar, king. He summons architects from Persia, mathematicians from Samarkand, and a poet from Andalusia whose verses make even the janissaries cry. He founds an imperial university inside the old monastery walls. You walk its halls sunlight through arched windows, the scratch of pens, the smell of parchment and coffee. It's hard to believe this is the same man who rode through the forest of the impaled. Empires, Mehmed says during one lecture, are like minds. They grow or decay depending on what they consume. Still, not everyone loves the new peace. Some soldiers grumble they were born for battle, not books. The Sultan's advisors warn him that indulgence softens empires. Mehmed smiles thinly. A dull sword is still dangerous in the right hands. That night, at a banquet for visiting scholars, someone recites a Greek poem praising Alexander the Great. The Sultan listens, then says, Alexander conquered the world but died at 33. I intend to outlive him and his poets. The guests laugh, but uneasily. Later, alone, Mehmed walks the terraces overlooking the city. The moon paints everything silver, the mosques, the palaces, even the scars on the walls. Vlad understood fear. he says quietly, almost to himself. But he didn't understand time. Time forgives no tyrant, but it remembers the builders. You think of that when you return to your quarters and hear the faint creak of carpenters working even at midnight. Istanbul never sleeps now. Mehmed has made sure of it. Yet despite the libraries and fountains, the Sultan's eyes darken more often. Sometimes you find him pacing before dawn, the lamps unlit. They love me, he says softly. They fear me. But neither lasts forever. You don't know how to answer, so you don't. A week later, a messenger arrives news of new uprisings in the west, minor but persistent. Mehmed reads the parchment, folds it carefully and says, "Send my greetings to the rebels. Tell them I still remember how to march." And when he smiles, you see it again, that glint of the boy who wanted to own the horizon. The palace smells of rosewater and politics. Months have passed since the campaign in the Carpathians, yet the air around Mehmed feels thicker now, like incense left too long in a closed room. He has returned victorious in name, but uneasy in spirit. The army sings of his triumphs. The court whispers about his rage. You walk through the marble corridors of Topkapi, where fountains murmur over white stone and the courtiers bow too deeply. The Sultan sits at the far end of the hall, his silhouette framed by gold latticework, his hand resting not on a sword but on a book. The poet Ali stands before him, trembling slightly, reading verses meant to praise the conqueror. "Your shadow cools the desert," he recites. "Your wisdom bends the stars." Mehmed listens, head tilted, expression unreadable. When the poet finishes, the Sultan simply asks, "And what bends me?" The question hangs in the air like smoke. No one answers. Historians still argue whether Mehmed was crueler in war or in peace. You're beginning to suspect the second. That night, during a quiet supper, a courier bursts in news from Trebizond. The last Byzantine enclave on the Black Sea still refuses to submit. Mehmed's lips tighten, then curve into something between a smile and a sigh. "So," he says softly, "there are still embers in the ashes. Within a month you're marching east again." The route winds through mountain passes and green valleys that smell of resin and rain. The army, though weary, moves like a river that has learned patience. Mehmed rides at the front, his armor gleaming faintly under overcast skies. He no longer speaks much to anyone. His generals exchange glances but say nothing. When you reach the city walls of Trebizond, the defenders hurl insults from the ramparts. Mehmed doesn't even look up. He simply orders the cannons placed and the heralds sent. "Tell them," he says, "I've come to close a chapter that began before their grandfathers were born." The siege doesn't last long. The cannons speak, and the city answers with silence. By sunset, its gates open, and the Emperor David Komnenos kneels before Mehmed, offering surrender. The Sultan dismounts, steps forward, and places a hand on the man's shoulder. "You've spared your people," he says kindly. "You'll be remembered as wise." Then, as the man begins to weep with relief, Mehmed adds, "But wisdom must never tempt foolishness again." A few months later, rumors spread that David and his sons have been quietly executed. No announcement, no trial, just absence. When you ask Mehmed why, he shrugs. "Mercy," he says, "is most useful when unpredictable. The empire swells like a tide, but its ruler grows quieter." Back in Istanbul, you find him gazing at the sea from his balcony, the wind tugging at his cloak. "The world keeps shrinking," he murmurs, "and yet I feel farther from it." He turns to you suddenly. "Do you know why I build so much?" You shake your head. "Because building is the only way to slow death." Later that night, you attend a private gathering in his library. The room glows with lamplight reflected off shelves of manuscripts. Scholars debate philosophy, astronomy, the shape of the soul. Mehmed listens, fingers steepled. When one bold scholar insists that even kings must answer to time, the Sultan smiles thinly. "Perhaps, but time must still pass through my gates to reach me." Outside, thunder rumbles across the Bosporus. It feels appropriate. A strange, fringe rumor begins to circulate that Mehmed owns a secret chamber beneath the palace where he keeps objects from every land he's conquered. A Roman helmet, a Greek cross, a crusader's sword, a Byzantine crown. "To remind myself," he supposedly says, "that all men become relics." You never see the chamber, but you believe it exists. One morning, you find him sketching again, this time not cities or cannons, but faces. He draws the outlines of his generals, his viziers, even his family. Each sketch bears a single mark across the throat, a faint line of ink. You don't ask what it means. When he finally looks up, he says, "An empire isn't ruled by the living alone. The dead do their part too." You think of the poet's question, what bends the conqueror? The answer may be this: the weight of all he's taken. Still, his vision endures. Roads stretch deeper into Asia, ships reach farther across the Mediterranean, and coins stamped with his name clink in every market from Cairo to Belgrade. The world begins to orbit him. Yet, at night, the man who owns that world still walks alone by candlelight, muttering verses to himself. The sea is wide, the stars are patient, but the heart is a narrow room. Somewhere outside, the rain begins again. You listen to its steady rhythm against the windows, wondering how long a man can build before even his own walls start whispering back. You find Mehmed in the gardens again, surrounded by scrolls, maps, and a silence that feels earned. The scent of tulips mixes with damp earth and ink. He no longer strides like a conqueror, he drifts, like a man still haunted by the echo of his own footsteps. He's older now, but not yet old. His beard is flecked with grey, his eyes darker than ever. When he speaks, his voice carries less fire, more gravity. "They call me Fatih the Conqueror," he says, "but what I've truly conquered is sleep." You sit with him beneath an almond tree, watching petals fall onto the open pages of Aristotle's Politics. "Do you still read the Greeks?" you ask. He chuckles softly. "I read everyone. Enemies make the best teachers." It's true. His library has become the envy of the world, thousands of manuscripts, copied and translated. Scholars whisper that he keeps one shelf reserved for banned texts, works even his clerics fear. "A ruler who bans books," he once said, "is a ruler who admits he cannot read his own people." But for all his love of learning, there's a shadow behind his eyes. The same mind that studies Plato also perfects punishment. You see it in the palace courtyards, where disloyal officials disappear with quiet efficiency. Mehmed trusts no one for long. One evening, a poet from Damascus recites a verse comparing the Sultan's reign to divine justice. The court applauds. Mehmed smiles, then asks the man to explain the line where "the ruler's hand outshines the moon." The poet stammers. "It is a metaphor, my Sultan." Mehmed leans forward. "Metaphors are dangerous. They allow truth to hide." He waves a hand, and the guards lead the man away. No one sees him again. Later, you hear Mehmed mutter, "Words can conquer faster than swords. I cannot afford either against me." Historians still argue whether he killed more with ink or iron. Watching him now, it's hard to separate the two. Still, there are moments when the scholar peeks through the armor. One night, during a discussion on astronomy, a philosopher claims that the stars are fixed forever. Mehmed interrupts. Nothing is fixed. Not stars, not men, not empires. He gestures toward the night sky. Everything burns eventually. The question is, does it burn bright enough to be remembered? He keeps looking west these days toward Italy, where the Renaissance hums. Ambassadors bring him sketches from Florence, domes, churches, flying machines. He studies them like puzzles. "They build beauty to please God," he says. "I build it to challenge him." But Italy is not the only thing in his mind. Closer to home, unrest brews. Rebellions rise in Serbia, treachery in the ranks, whispers in the harem. One afternoon, a messenger kneels before him, trembling. Your governor in Anatolia defied your command. He calls himself Sultan. Mehmed's expression doesn't change. He dismisses the council, walks to the balcony, and stares at the horizon. The Bosporus glitters below. "So," he says finally, "the lesson must be repeated." The next week, the rebel governor's head arrives in a velvet sack. Mehmed opens it, looks at the face for a long time, and says, "He was loyal once." Then he orders a prayer for the man's soul. You wonder if that prayer is habit or regret. Despite the turmoil, Istanbul thrives. New baths open, bridges span the Golden Horn, and the palace glitters with imported glass from Venice. Every dawn, call to prayer rises above the city's hum, and for a moment peace feels possible. But you've been around him too long to believe it lasts. That night, you find him alone again in his study. The lamps burn low. A letter lies half-written on the desk, its ink still wet. To future rulers, it begins. Remember that mercy without memory is wasted. He looks up when you enter. Do you think they'll ever understand me? You hesitate. History always does, you say. He smiles faintly. No, history forgives. That's worse. Then he turns back to the page and writes another line. Build as if you'll live forever. Rule as if you'll die tomorrow. It's quiet for a while. The only sound is the soft scratching of his pen and the whisper of wind through the open window. The city below glows with lamplight alive, eternal, fragile. And for once, you realize he isn't trying to conquer anything. He's trying to leave something that can't be conquered. The year turns, and with it, the rhythm of the empire. You wake to the sound of gulls and hammering once more the music of Mehmed's reign. But something in the cadence has changed. It's not the hurried pace of a builder. It's slower, heavier. The Sultan's steps echo longer in the palace halls. He walks differently now. His back is straight, but his eyes have learned fatigue. I've built too much, he tells you one morning as you stroll the colonnades of Topkapi. Cities, mosques, men's expectations. Everything demands feeding. You follow his gaze toward the gardens where slaves prune rose bushes. He watches them for a moment, then murmurs, "The thorns grow faster than the flowers." The empire is thriving, yes, but rebellions keep sprouting like weeds after rain. Anatolia again, Bosnia, Albania. Each uprising feels smaller than the last, but Mehmed treats them all like personal insults. One afternoon he summons his viziers to the divan hall. The sunlight filters through painted glass, scattering colours over the marble floor. The air is heavy with incense and nerves. The governor of Karaman, the Grand Vizier says carefully, has delayed his tribute. Mehmed sets down his pen. Has he forgotten who feeds his table? He claims illness, my Sultan. Then, Mehmed says calmly, send him medicine made of iron. Historians still argue whether the Sultan meant it as a joke. The viziers certainly didn't laugh. That night, you find him reading again, a scroll of Persian poetry this time. Listen, he says, his voice softer than the flicker of the lamp. The lion cannot sleep while the hyenas whisper. He rolls up the scroll. Do you think they whisper about me too? You answer truthfully. They whisper about everyone who commands silence. He smiles, almost kindly. Then let them whisper until they run out of breath. The next campaign begins before spring. You travel with him across Anatolia again, through barren hills that still bear the scars of earlier wars. The people cheer as the army passes, but their cheers sound practiced. Mehmed rides ahead, wearing a cloak of dark velvet, his beard trimmed with obsessive precision. At night, the campfires burn low, and the soldiers whisper about what happens to those who disobey. He forgives slower than God, one says. But there are other whispers too. That he dreams of building a canal between the Black Sea and the Marmara. That he wants to dig a river where there is none, so ships can cross his empire without ever seeing open water. You ask him about it. Why not? He says. The pharaohs built pyramids. I'll build a sea. His ambitions are too large to be mortal, and that's what scares you. You return to Istanbul months later. The city has changed again. Streets paved, towers polished. Even the wind seems to carry his name. The people call him Padishah of the world. He hates it and loves it equally. He retreats deeper into the palace, now surrounded by scholars, astrologers, and physicians. Each morning begins with lessons, mathematics, law, astronomy. If kings must rule, he says, they should at least understand the stars that ignore them. Still, that same restlessness gnaws at him. One evening, while the muezzin's call fades across the water, you find him alone on a terrace, staring at the distant hills. Tell me, he says quietly, when does a conqueror retire? Perhaps when he has no more enemies, you suggest. He chuckles. Then never. He walks to the edge, gazing at the Bosporus, glinting under moonlight. Do you know what they'll call this age? He asks. The age of Mehmed, you reply. He shakes his head. No, the age of forgetting. They'll build over my stones, paint over my walls, write my name in smaller letters. He looks at you then tired, almost human. That's why I build higher every year. One morning, A messenger arrives from Anatolia. The rebellion there is crushed. The rebel leader's head is sent in a chest. Mehmed opens it without hesitation. The smell makes the guards flinch, but he doesn't blink. "See," he says, "iron cures illness." You can't tell if it's irony or justification. That same evening, he holds court in the audience chamber. Artists present him with a miniature painting, his portrait, serene, crowned, surrounded by books and maps. Mehmed studies it for a long time. "Too peaceful," he says finally. "Add thunder behind the clouds." The artist nods, trembling. "But my Sultan, that would disturb the harmony." "Exactly," Mehmed replies. "Nothing lives long in harmony." He spends his nights among philosophers now. One evening, an old scholar from Persia dares to ask, "My Sultan, you study everything, religion, art, war, but what of the soul?" Mehmed's answer is quiet. "I build cities so it has somewhere to hide." Later, you find that same scholar has been sent home with gifts, not punishment. Mehmed's mercy still flickers now and then, like the last light in a long corridor, but you sense it the coming storm. The Sultan grows more introspective, his moods shifting like the sea. Sometimes he speaks with tenderness about the empire's poets. Other times he orders an execution before breakfast. The court walks on eggshells, and you realize something chilling. He's no longer trying to rule men. He's trying to rule time itself. He writes one final decree before dawn. "Let the builders rest tomorrow. The stones have earned silence." For once, even the hammers stop. The palace feels colder now. The fountains still murmur, the servants still bow, but something invisible has shifted like a melody that's lost its rhythm. Mehmed no longer walks through Topkapi with his usual measured calm. He glides, restless, as if afraid to stop moving. The corridors echo differently when he passes, longer, emptier. You find him one morning sitting in the council chamber, alone, a chessboard before him. Half the pieces are toppled. "Do you know what I've learned?" he asks quietly without looking up. You hesitate. "What, my Sultan?" "That victory only rearranges the pieces." He flicks a pawn aside. The board remains the same. He's 52 now, though he doesn't look it. His face has hardened, carved by the weight of power and sleepless nights. A streak of silver runs through his hair, but his mind, sharp, bright, merciless, still burns like a forge. Outside, the empire hums. Markets, minarets, and marching orders. Inside, suspicion grows like ivy. The Janissaries whisper that he's preparing for another great campaign, one against Italy itself. Scholars call it madness, soldiers call it destiny. You're not sure what to call it. But when you see the Sultan poring over Italian maps by candlelight, sketching troop routes toward Otranto, you know he's already decided. "Rome," he says one night, tracing the map with his finger. "The city that once ruled the world must kneel to the city that replaced it." Historians still argue whether he meant it literally or as a challenge to the memory of Caesar. Watching him now, you suspect both. But even as plans for invasion deepen, so does his paranoia. Letters are intercepted, courtiers dismissed, friends exiled. One evening, you witness something that chills you. His eldest son Bayezid kneels before him obedient, cautious, reverent. Mehmed studies him for a long time. "They say you are wise," the Sultan says. Bayezid bows his head. "I try to be, father. Good. Wisdom keeps you alive." Then Mehmed's tone softens, almost gentle. "But never forget, it also keeps you watched." You glance at the guards. They shift uncomfortably. The message is clear. Later that night, you find the Sultan pacing the gardens under the lanterns. "Suns are like shadows," he mutters. "They stretch longest when the light fades." The empire is his, but peace eludes him. One dawn, a messenger from Anatolia brings dire news. Rumors of treason among the Janissaries. Mehmed listens in silence, eyes unreadable. Then he says, "Rumors are like smoke. They hide the fire underneath." He calls an emergency council. You stand at the edge, as the viziers argue, voices rising, hands trembling. One insists the rumors are false. Another says they can't afford to ignore them. Finally, Mehmed lifts his hand. Silence falls like a curtain. "Find the truth," he says softly. "But remember, It's easier to bury a rumor when the rumor monger goes with it. The next morning, 3 officers disappear. No one asks where. His health begins to fail soon after. The physicians whisper of stomach pains, sleeplessness, and fainting spells. He refuses to rest. Rest is for the conquered. He snaps when you beg him to stop working. He spends long hours at the window overlooking the Bosporus, eyes fixed on the ships gliding by. You can almost hear his thoughts grinding. One night, as thunder cracks over the city, he says, "Do you ever wonder what people will say about me in 100 years? Yes, you admit. They'll call you great." He smiles faintly. Greatness is just another name for unfinished business. Spring arrives. He announces the new campaign, the March West. The army cheers, though many exchange anxious looks. The Janissaries polish their helmets with superstition. The court begins preparing for the journey as if rehearsing a ritual. Before leaving, Mehmed visits Hagia Sophia once more. You follow him through the cool corridors, the scent of wax and old stone thick in the air. He kneels on the marble floor and whispers something too soft to catch. When he stands, his face is unreadable. "Even the stones remember prayer," he says. He spends his last night in the palace walking its halls alone. You trail him from a distance. He pauses before a fresco he once ordered, covered the faint outline of a Byzantine angel still visible beneath plaster. His fingers brush the wall. "Strange," he murmurs, "how beauty survives orders." The next morning the army departs for the west. Drums roll, banners snap, and the Sultan rides out beneath a grey sky. The city watches from rooftops as its master leaves once again to chase the horizon. By evening, rain begins to fall, a steady, endless drizzle that seems to follow the army down the road. You glance at him riding ahead, cloaked in dark velvet, water beading on his armor. He doesn't turn back. Somewhere in your chest, an unease settles. The campaign feels different this time, heavier, fated. You remember his own words. The hardest battles are the ones you fight inside the walls you've built yourself. And as thunder rumbles behind you, you can't shake the feeling that this, finally, is the one battle even Mehmed cannot win. The road west winds through damp forests and open plains, the kind that make the air taste of iron and pine. You ride near the front of the column, close enough to see the Sultan's cloak ripple in the wind. His pace is steady, relentless, but something in his posture betrays fatigue. The great conqueror who once made mountains kneel now rides slower, his shoulders bowed not from defeat, but from the weight of what he carries within. The army whispers that he's unwell. His face has gone pale, his eyes ringed with shadows, his appetite fading. Still, when anyone dares to ask, he smiles and says, "A little pain keeps the mind awake." By the time you reach the outskirts of Gebze, the sky bruises with storm clouds. The camp is set on a low hill, tents fluttering under the smell of sea wind. From afar, you can hear the murmur of waves breaking against the shore, the Bosporus, eternal witness to his rise, now waiting for his last march. That night, thunder rolls like slow drums. Mehmed lies on a cot in his command tent, surrounded by doctors, scribes, and silence. You stand at the edge, watching the flicker of lamplight across his face. His eyes remain sharp, but his breath comes shallow, like a man whispering secrets to himself. He waves the physicians away. "You can't cure the years," he says quietly. "Only count them." When the tent empties, he gestures for you to come closer. His hand trembles slightly as he grips yours. "Do you remember," he murmurs, "the night before we took Constantinople?" "Yes, my Sultan," he smiles faintly. "I thought death would come then. I was wrong." He's polite. He waits until you've finished building his city. You want to speak, to reassure him, but words feel heavy. He leans back, eyes tracing the canvas ceiling as rain begins to fall again. "Promise me," he says. "When they write of me, they'll tell the truth, not the polished version." You hesitate. "And what is the truth, my Sultan?" "That I was tired even at the beginning," he whispers. "That every victory costs a piece you never get back." Outside, lightning flashes. For a heartbeat, the whole tent glows, his face lit from below, half human, half myth. Historians still argue whether he died of illness or poison. You know it doesn't matter. The truth lies in the slow fade, the conqueror unraveling thread by thread. He asks for his youngest son, Sem. The boy kneels beside him, tears streaking his face. "Don't cry," Mehmed says softly. "You'll inherit more ghosts than gold." Later, when even the attendants have drifted into uneasy silence, you sit alone with him. The storm has passed, leaving only the steady drip of water from the tent ropes. Mehmed's breathing slows. "Do you hear that?" he asks. "The rain?" You whisper. "No," he says, closing his eyes. "The city. She's still breathing." His last words come not as proclamation, but as confession. "Tell them I loved the noise of building more than the silence of prayer." And then nothing. Just the hiss of the candle as it gutters out. You stay there, counting his breaths long after they've stopped, unwilling to believe the rhythm has ended. By dawn the camp knows. No one dares speak. The flag on the Sultan's tent flutters weakly in the wind, and the seagulls circle low over the water. The empire itself seems to hold still, waiting for instructions from a man who can no longer give them. They wrap his body in silk and carry him toward Istanbul under grey skies. The march feels endless. Villagers line the roads, some weeping, others watching in stunned quiet. No one cheers this time. As the procession nears the city, the domes of Hagia Sophia glint through the mist. Bells toll softly, mixing with the call to prayer. Two sounds that once clashed now mourn together. You walk behind the bier, remembering his words. Building and breaking are brothers. When they reach the courtyard of Fatih Mosque, his own creation, his monument to himself, the crowd falls to its knees. The coffin is lowered into the earth, the marble lid sealed. Some say the sky cleared at that moment. Others claim the air smelled briefly of roses. You can't remember which is true. You only remember the silence, the kind that follows the end of something too vast to name. That night, the muezzin's voice drifts over the sleeping city. The domes gleam. The Bosporus glows faintly under the moon. You stand by the palace balcony, watching Istanbul breathe exactly as he said it would. The world moves on. Merchants bargain, poets write. The stones he laid begin their slow conversation with time. And somewhere beneath all that, beneath marble, beneath legend, lies Mehmed, still listening for the sound of hammers. Istanbul wakes slowly, the way old cities do, its domes exhaling mist, its markets stretching awake beneath a pale dawn. Word of the Sultan's death has travelled faster than the wind. Mourners gather in silence at the mosque courtyards, hands raised, eyes lowered. The sound of the Bosporus has never felt louder. You stand in the gardens of Topkapi, surrounded by the scent of wet stone and jasmine. The palace feels smaller now, like a shell that's lost its occupant. Mehmed's absence hangs in every corridor, in every echoing step. The council meets behind closed doors. Already, the machinery of empire turns again. Letters are sealed, orders rewritten, sons weighed against succession. The same cycle he once commanded now devours him, proof that even conquerors get conquered by time. Historians will later argue about what he left behind, empire or myth. You know it's both. You wander down to the harbour, where the city meets the sea. The water glows silver beneath the morning light, and for a moment, you remember his first dream. The maps, the stars, the child tracing lines with ink-stained fingers. Constantinople had been just a shape on parchment once, fragile and unreachable, and yet here it stands. Living, noisy, eternal. A fisherman nearby tells his son, "The Sultan is gone, but the city breathes because of him." The boy nods, though you're not sure he understands. You think of Mehmed's last words, how he preferred the noise of building to the silence of prayer. You can hear that noise still. Chisels striking, hammers ringing, the faint hum of merchants setting up stalls. The empire doesn't mourn long. It builds to forget. You walk through the streets he made, past the mosques that pierce the sky and the fountains where children play. Every sound feels like a heartbeat, steady, endless. At the Hagia Sophia, sunlight spills through stained glass, scattering colour across marble. The call to prayer begins, low and resonant. A few Greek elders pray quietly in the corner, crossing themselves as they have for centuries. The voices intertwine, rising, falling, neither conquering nor yielding. You sit on the cool stone floor, letting the sound wash over you. It feels less like victory, more like balance. Outside, pigeons scatter as the noon breeze drifts over the rooftops. The world moves on. Mehmed's ships still patrol the waters. His coins still pass from hand to hand. His laws still decide who eats and who starves. Yet none of it belongs to him anymore. The empire continues, but the man has become a story. A soldier nearby, young and sunburned, ties a red thread around the hilt of his sword. "For luck," he says when you ask. "My father fought at the walls. He said the Sultan promised the city would never die." You nod, but you know promises are like empires. They live only as long as someone keeps believing in them. That night, you climb the hill overlooking the Golden Horn. The view stretches wide, ships gliding, lights shimmering, the hum of life unending. You close your eyes and imagine Mehmed standing beside you, still drawing invisible lines on the horizon. Perhaps he's smiling, or perhaps he's still counting the unfinished stones in his dream. The wind off the water smells of rain, salt, and history. It brushes your face gently, like a final benediction. The empire he forged will splinter someday, everything does, but for now, the city glows, and the world remembers the boy who dared to draw it anew. You whisper into the night, "You were right, the city breathes," and for a heartbeat, you swear it exhales back. Wind down, 300 words. The night deepens over the Bosporus, the sound of waves soft against the shore. The city's lanterns shimmer, their reflections trembling like quiet memories. You slow your breathing, letting the rhythm of water and wind settle your thoughts. The empire fades to a whisper now, its noise, its fire, its endless hammering all dissolving into calm. You picture Mehmed's marble tomb beneath the earth, cool and still, surrounded by the hum of the city he built. Above him, life continues, fishermen casting nets, merchants calling out, children laughing in alleyways where history once bled. Time has done what even cannon could not, turned war into lullaby. You let your shoulders sink. Each sound grows softer, the bells, the gulls, the faint rustle of silk in the evening breeze. The weight of centuries feels lighter now, as if the past itself is exhaling. The domes gleam under a silver moon. The city is peaceful finally, and so are you. Breathe in the scent of the sea, the warmth of the air. Breathe out the noise of conquest, the ache of memory. Imagine the water rocking gently against the stones, like a hand smoothing a restless heart. The world shrinks to a quiet pulse. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another empire dreams. Another builder draws his first line in the sand. But for tonight, here in the glow of a sleeping city, you rest in the space between history and peace. The hammering stops. The noise fades. All that remains is the sound of your own breath, soft as the tide. Sleep well, traveler. The city will keep breathing for you.